Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Gothically Yours, Professor M. I'm Professor M, and today I'm going to be doing a wonderful episode on Goth Victorianism. Today, if you're just joining in for the first entire time, I hope that you will enjoy my channel because I am an elder Goth, and I wish to share all of my Gothic knowledge with you. Anyone out there, especially for the baby bats, who want to know a little bit more about the grand Gothic family tree. Now, I also want to introduce you to a wonderful family member of mine over here. This is David. He's one of two skulls that I own. I have another one called Cedric, who is at the home at the moment. And David will be joining us today as I talk about my love of all things Victorian Goth. Now, I'm going to start off my Goth rant with, how did you know you were a Gothic Victorian? Well, Victorian Goth hit me when I was very young. I had a wonderful mother, and I've mentioned this in one of my other videos, who pulled me down the rabbit's hole, so to speak, as she brought me to things like the cemeteries of New England, where we walked around and looked at old stones from the 1600s and the 1700s. She showed me the elegance of beauty and darkness. I had a wonderful mom who just watched all of the classic horror flicks, and she loves all those monster movies and vampire stuff, and anyways, my mom was a great influence on me. But how do you know that you are a Victorian Goth, or how do you know what avenue of Goth you belong to? Well, if you haven't seen my video before, I have talked about the 45 branches of the Goth family tree. Actually, in fact, there are now 46. Grunge Goth has been added. But if you go down and look at that video, you'll hear about all the different branches of the Gothic family tree. And I'll talk about genealogy a little bit later in my video. And I had discovered that I had a very profound love for a fashion or a style. And I couldn't figure out where it was from. And as I started discovering the word Victorianism, it pulled me into a certain area of Goth. Now, Mom was a great person because she would often drive around New England and say, look at this beautiful Victorian mansion, look at that beautiful Victorian mansion. And I started learning about the different eras of the Victorian world. Now, there's three different parts. There is an early, a mid, and a late Victorian era. I just so happen to be interested in the late Victorian era. How do I know that? Because I love accessories. I love the concept of top hats, canes, gloves, and bustles. Eras of mourning, women wearing all black, walking through cemeteries with veils over their faces. How romantic. Another thing that interested me all the time was the Addams Family, which was a very large influence. After watching many Addams Family movies and looking at cartoons, the original cartoons, mind you, the Charles Addams back in the 1930s and 40s, I was completely hooked and said, this is for me. I wanted to be Gomez Addams, and the jacket today was a very sought after item that I had to have more than anything else before. And sharing a little bit about that, that's how I started to know that I was into Victorian Goth. Also, what also made it more interesting was I was very interested in certain types of fabrics. Velvet, velveteen, silk, damask. You find all the certain types of lace, and you find those in the Victorian era. So I was highly influenced to go into it. But you have to find out what area you are. Are you early? Are you mid? Are you late? There's a large, vast field to walk through to find out which area you love. Some people also get into stopwatches and chains on their waists, corsets, fans, all that materials. If you love that, you are probably very, very, very highly into Victorian Goth. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we've got other branches. There's Edwardian Goth too. Now, after the Victorian era came Edwardian Goth. It's a little bit thinner, but I have met a few Edwardian-inspired Gothic brothers. And after that, and closely related, is the vampire Goths. Vampire Goths are also in the same lineage with the Victorian Goths. Now, if you haven't seen my video on the Gothic family tree, just scroll over to one of the sides over there and you'll see the explanation of the Gothic family tree, and you'll see how it's all connected. That's what professors do. We explain stuff. I love being an elder Goth. Let me go on a little bit more, and I wrote a list down in front of me. Victorian Goths do love vampire materials. We love all kinds of dark literature, from the fall of the House of Usher to Frankenstein, all that really dark, rich literature, the Gothic material, Gothic architecture we love. If you find yourself in that, you might actually find yourself falling into the Victorian Gothic world. I also want to share Anne Rice being one of our most prolific and most wonderful vampire authors ever. It has passed. And let's have a moment of silence to thank her for Louis and Lestat. Thank you, Anne, and may she always be influencing young Gothic sisters who have V bangs. I'd like to share a little bit also that if you are interested in things like mourning, mourning is a time of the Victorian era where young people would go to the cemeteries and have picnics. Now, the mourning era of the Victorian era lasted long time. Many of the women could be in mourning up to 3 years. Men wore bands around their biceps to show that they were in mourning after losing, say, a wife or a child in their family. There was a lot of post-mortem photography that was done where the body was then hooked up and the family came together for the final photograph. Something that they should have done earlier when the person was alive, but needed to document it for memory's sake. Now you also have to know that a disease called consumption was rampant during the Victorian era, and no one understood what we know today. We're in the middle of this whole COVID-19 thing, and the whole entire world is pretty much vaccinated, but during that time it was not as asked of in society as it is today. So we do have a benefit for that. But consumption was seen as something romantic. If you just look at the words of Edgar Allan Poe, how women would faint over his talk about the romanticism of consumption, and young women who just got married now losing their loved ones and then going to the cemetery and placing black wreaths on stones, having meals with their family. During the Victorian era, this was very popular. Very popular to bring the whole entire family to the cemetery. The cemeteries were like a park. They were alive. They were places where people gathered to be with their lost loved ones. All of this was greatly influenced as I learned about the Victorian era. Things I love. Why I should have been an undertaker. Now let's go a little bit more into this. If you love cemeteries like I love cemeteries and have ever followed or have ever eaten in one, you probably have a profound love of Victorian life. Here's something that I had done years ago that I want to share. For many years, I had worked at a particular company, and right next door there was a place to get lunches. So I would go over to get the lunch, and then right next to our business was a huge cemetery. Some of the stones are dating back to the 1860s. And I would just drive my car out over there and eat my lunch in the cemetery. I know someone's listening now who's often said, well, I've done that too. If you have, leave a comment in the link down below. Share with me about what you had. One day I was walking out the door, and one of the ladies that I work with said, "Oh, where are you going?" And I says, "Well, I'm going to go get a box lunch at the local diner next door." She goes, "Oh, could you bring me back one?" I said, "What do you like?" And she says, "Oh, like the hamburger special." And I said, "Absolutely, sure." I said, "I'll be back in 1 hour. Where are you going?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to go pick up my box lunch and then go eat it in the cemetery." "What? I don't want those hamburgers. I don't want those hamburgers." The look on her face was so abysmal, it was worth saying it. But I found peace and solace sitting in a car, eating my lunch, in a completely secluded place, surrounded by silence and a complete feeling of decadence. You might be a Victorian Goth. Just let it flow. I did that for over a year. I miss it. Now, a thing I also want to share about you. Victorian Gothic fashion. We have a concept where gender bending is allowed. What that means is that women can wear top hats and can walk around with canes and pocket watches and even cigars if they wanted to, whereas the men can go in corsets and lace if they like to. It is completely fluid. It's a very fluid part of the Gothic scene. So if you're really into that, hey, let it flow. It's the 21st century. Another thing is elegancy. There's so many elegant things about the Victorian era that I love. And also the Gothic things that we pull into there. Candles, skulls, beautiful sets of cutlery, churches, old books, candelabras, antique furniture, pianos. What did Lurch play? Oh, he played a very special little piano. Oh, I'll think of that in a moment, or I'll just put it over here. Anyways, but those things pull us in, and I absolutely love that bit of darkness. I'd also like to share with you that we like things like Iron Maidens, castles, large estates, different types of wines, and all kinds of unusual adult beverages. Speaking of which, excuse me. And any type of adult beverages that you're into, whether it's red or green. And these are things that make the Goth world so wonderful if you're Victorian Goth. The Gothic family part of the Gothic family tree is very expensive. Just dressing up and feeling this good, yeah, you have to invest a little bit of money in it. You like this? Good. I bought it on a tour that I had gone to. I had to have it. Double buttoned vests. Dressed to nines usually are how Victorian Goths spend their day. Another very important element of Victorian Goths are we love genealogy. I absolutely love in the Addams Family movie where at the end, I think her name is Margaret. She marries cousin It, and Gomez says, "Let's play Wake the Dead." Wake the Dead, and Margaret replies, "How do you play?" And Grandmama says, "Did you bring a shovel?" They're going to dig up their ancestors. Genealogy. If you are into Victorian Goth, you will discover that genealogy is a very large consuming passion of your life. For some reason, I got into genealogy, researching my grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, all the way back to my 7th great-grandparents, all the way back in Europe. At first, I thought, oh my goodness. I discovered that I'm 100% Galatian. And on that, I thought to myself, am I a gypsy? But no, I am not. Gypsy, you know gypsies, right? The little carts, the horses. Strangely enough, quite a few of my great-grandparents were the great-grandfathers were horsemen. They raised horses on both sides, my mother and father's side. They were horsemen. Horses, black stallions, are very important in Gothic literature. We find that the stallion has that dark entity to it. So these are just elements about being a Victorian Goth. We love beauty and darkness, and there's nothing wrong with that. Flowing and just letting yourself find that serenity and peacefulness, whether it's in morning of literature or the words on a page of Anne Rice's books or within an old cinematic movie. And there are 6 different areas of our Gothic family tree that we get into. There's architecture, literature, fashion, music, and there's other branches. But what kind of music does Victorian Goth listen to? Well, I listen to ethereal. And for those who are into ethereal, one of my favorite bands of all times is the Cocteau Twins. I don't know why, but it is just so surreal and otherworldly, ethereal Gothic music. Just, it resonates my soul. Harpsichord, harpsichord, harpsichord. Lurch played the harpsichord. I'm getting old, but it takes me a moment to, rewind the CD player, rewind the gramophone. Anyways, I'm going to end out my little rant here. If you are Victorian Goth and love Victorian Gothism, the era of mourning, or anything else, and you want to know more about it or have any questions or comments, please leave me a comment down below. I will surely get back with you. But enjoy the time that we have while we have it above ground. Gothically yours, Professor